bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricky Varandas, also known as Ricky Varandas, and today we have a great conversation for you and a great guest with DJ, journalist, author, Mark Devlin. He is coming to the U.S. actually for a mini speaking tour, and on this episode we talk about the things he'll be discussing on that tour. We also talk about all the locations and all the dates for the tour. So if you're in the East Coast, if you're looking to go to a thought-provoking lecture and learn a little bit about the music industry, social engineering, and much more, please check out the links in the show description. If Mark's coming anywhere near your neck of the woods, check him out. The tickets are reasonably priced. It's a great opportunity to hang out with like-minded people, learn some stuff, and just go check out a cool venue, because I am familiar with a couple of the venues he's going to, and they're definitely worth checking out. But before we get into all the conspiracy surrounding the music industry and all the dark arts and what it all means, let me remind you, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of these discussions, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial, like I always remind you guys. I know many people are in tough financial times, and if that's the case, there's plenty of other ways of supporting shows that you enjoy. You can rate the show, review the show, subscribe to the show, leave comments, do all those things that help fight against the algorithms that suppress conversations and shows like these. But if you are in a good financial situation, you can afford supporting the show, even if it's just a little donation, please consider doing so, and there's plenty of ways you can do it. You can sign up for our Patreon page and support us with as little as $1 a month, and if a small percentage of the people who listen and watch the Ripple Effect podcast donated as little as $1 a month, I could easily do the show full time. So that puts in perspective how little you have to donate to really make a huge impact. And you can also send a one-time donation to our PayPal account, our Venmo account. You can send crypto to our crypto wallet. You can send Ethereum or Bitcoin. All these links are in the show description, or you can go to the website, therippleeffectpodcast.com. Other ways of supporting the show is checking out our merch store. Go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com, and you can find mugs, you can find t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, stickers, and a bunch of cool stuff. So please check out the merch store, browse around, hopefully you find something you like, and you can get some cool merch and support the Ripple Effect Podcast at the same time. And other ways of supporting the show is checking out our sponsors. One of them is Content Safe. And if you're a content creator of any sort, YouTuber, streamer, podcaster, please pay close attention to this sponsor, because Content Safe saves me tons of uploading time. What Content Safe does for me, among other things, because they run my website and do other things, but their most unique and helpful service that they can provide to content creators is syncing all your video channels together. So what that means is I upload to one location, to a YouTube channel, which I'm not on anymore because I got kicked off. But if I was on YouTube, I could upload to my YouTube channel, or I can upload to my Rockfin or Rumble channel or my Odyssey channel. I just have to upload to one location, put my thumbnail, put my description, all that stuff to one spot, and then magically that video, thumbnail, and description and all that info appears on all my channels. So I upload, for example, to my Odyssey channel, then soon after, magically, that video appears on Band.video, Minds, Rumble, Rockfin, and all the video channels I'm on. So like I said, if you're a content creator and this seems like a service that could be helpful to you, hit up Matt from Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener of the Ripple Effect Podcast, and he'll definitely take care of you. The next sponsor is the University of Reason, created by Richard Grove. Richard Grove is a historian. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's also the host of the Grand Theft World podcast, and a dear friend of mine. And he created a University of Reason to connect with a freedom-minded, liberty-minded community, to help people who are at a crossroads in life, or people who feel like they're a hamster on a wheel running in place and need to make a life change check out the University of Reason. Please use the link in the show description, and you can hopefully help yourself and support the Ripple Effect podcast at the same time. But please use the link to do so. And then last but not least is the only sponsor I use on a daily basis just about, and that's Element Electrolytes. It was formulated by an OG in the health and nutrition community. His name is Rob Wolf. He's been on every major health and nutrition podcast. He's been a part of some of the most important books and documentaries about health and nutrition. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been a past guest on this show. And he created Element Electrolytes. It's this powder that you put in your water. It has no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, only the things you need, none of the stuff you don't need, and also has the right dosages, because that's very important. Some electrolyte drinks or powders might have electrolytes, but not enough to make a difference, not enough to optimize your body and mind, not enough to prevent the cramping, brain fog, fatigue, migraines, and all the other symptoms that can be due to dehydration. And if you use the link in the show description, you'll get a free gift with every purchase. But also when you click that link, you'll see all the science behind Element Electrolytes and all the benefits of using electrolytes on a daily basis to help with hydration. And remember, all the creators of these sponsors, Content Safety, University of Reason, and Element Electrolytes, all the creators are friends of the show, past guests of the show. So if you want to learn more about them and their services, please check out past episodes. You can go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com, put their names in the search engine, and then you can find those episodes. A couple other things before we get into this conversation. I want to give a shout out to Colin from Connecticut. He's a friend of Richard Groves and mine. We always meet up at Richard's house when he has little parties and get-togethers, and he's a great dude who let me know that Mark was coming to the U.S. and sparked the idea of getting him on the Ripple Effect podcast. And then also we just had a great episode of the Union of the Unwanted. If you guys aren't familiar with that show, I don't know how you can't be. But if you're new to the Ripple Effect podcast and you've never heard of the Union of the Unwanted, it is my roundtable discussion type of podcast, which I co-host with Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat podcast, Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. We just had an amazing episode with Adam Curry, who is the godfather of podcasting. He's also the host of the No Agenda show, which is a show that I'm a huge fan of and would refer to that show a lot during COVID because they're just doing some of the best work deconstructing what the media was saying, what was really going on. But if you haven't yet, please check out the Union of the Unwanted. The audio is available on all the audio platforms, and then the videos are available on Rockfin and then also Odyssey soon after we live stream it. So definitely check out the Union of the Unwanted. We've had some amazing guests on that show. Roseanne Barr, we've had Del Bigtree, Jim Florentine, we've had Dr. Peter McCullough on the day that his Joe Rogan episode dropped. We had G. Edward Griffin, we've had Max Kaiser on, Roger Stone, Greg Pallas, Dr. Judy Mikovich, just to name a few. So check out the unionoftheunwanted.com to find all our links, all our channels, all the places you can follow us. Also, one last shout out to Graham from the Grimerica show. He helped me get Adam Curry on the Union of the Unwanted, which was a huge get. And that networking and friendships created by the Union of the Unwanted and the gathering of the minds for those episodes have really been awesome because it really has helped a lot with people being exposed to new content creators and also helping people network. And even though many of the guests on the Union of the Unwanted have been past guests of this show, we have definitely gotten some amazing guests with help from other friends of the Union of the Unwanted. So thanks everyone who listens to that show. Definitely one of the coolest parts of having that show is not just getting the great, huge guests, but also just all the amazing conversations that we've had on that show. We've done episodes on near-death experiences, on cryptocurrency, on UFOs, so many intriguing and fascinating conversations with some really intriguing, fascinating guests. So check out the archives. And that's finally it. Enjoy this amazing conversation with Mark, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.
Well, I'm someone that's always enjoyed music, from being a young kid. I got into it aged 5, and the first record I ever bought was Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, first time around. I remember seeing it on Top of the Pops on British TV every week when it was number one in Christmas 1975. And it just captivated me. The video was incredible. The song lyrics were just amazing and mystical. And I went out and bought that record with some pocket money that my parents gave me. And that just started my lifelong interest with music. And so for the first few years, I was just into whatever was in the charts, pop music generally. And then in my teenage years, I kind of refined my tastes and I got into black music. So it was like soul, funk, hip hop, R&B, early house music. And I decided I wanted to become a DJ because I just loved music so much. I wanted to share that passion with other people. That's why 99% of people become DJs, just because they want other people to get that same enjoyment and buzz out of music as they do. So I managed to achieve that. I'm not going to say it was an easy process. It was a hard slog, and there was lots of hustling and networking involved. But I started out on radio and I got a job at a station local to me in Oxford, England, which is where I grew up, a station called Fox FM, which ironically equates to 666 in gematria. So I think that was the starting of things there. And I worked on that station for 6 years. I used to produce a show which came live from a nightclub in Oxford every Friday night. And that made me decide that I wanted to become a club DJ as well. So, as well as doing all the background production stuff at the radio station, I did a bit more hustling and managed to get myself a spot at a nightclub in Oxford. And things just continued from there. And I was fortunate enough to make a bit of a name for myself on my scene as a DJ. I was playing R&B, hip hop, reggae, street soul, stuff like that. And I got gigs up and down the UK, managed to play internationally in quite a few countries. And I wrote for some magazines as well. I was a music journalist. And then things got to round about 2007, 2008, where I started to have some big questions about what was really going on in the world and what this world really was in the first place. And that started me on the journey that I'm on now. And I kind of redefined my perception of what this world is all about, who's really running things, to what end, what agendas are being pushed. And so that set me off on a completely different path to the one that I'd been on. And other things became important to me. So, whereas music and parties and clubs and tunes were the main thing in my life up to that point, from sort of 2008 onwards, I wanted to comprehend better the true dynamic of what was going on in this world, what we're doing in it, and what it's all about.
Now we talked, or you discussed a little bit about some of your musical influences. What was some of your influences in regards to your worldview and uncovering some of these things?
There weren't really any music artists that kind of put me on to these new subjects. It was authors and researchers. So initially it was the books of David Icke. And then I got into people like Mark Passio, Jan Irvin, and Joe Atwill had a great show called Unspun. And it was Freeman and Fritz Springmeier and some of these researchers. In terms of music, I started to see many of the artists that I'd revered up to that point in an entirely different light, particularly hip hop artists, rappers. So, up to those times, I was a big fan of Jay-Z, for example. I thought he was a very gifted lyricist. I was a fan of Kanye West. I liked the productions of Dr. Dre and all the stuff that he was putting out. And I came to discover as I did the research that these individuals are very far from heroes. They're pushing some very dark agendas. Many of them are stooges and tools that are being used by the real controllers of these industries. And it left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, to be honest. So, whereas I'd been a fan of that music and that culture, I really started to turn away from it and look in other directions for musical influences. So, I started to gravitate towards many of the truth and freedom artists that are out there making empowering message music. And there's many, many of them. You just never get to hear about them. You don't see them on YouTube. You certainly don't see them on TV, don't hear them on the radio, but they are out there. And that music has pretty much sustained me for the last 15 years or so. It's just good to know that there are people that see the world in the same way as I do, or at least have the same questions, and they're putting it into their music. And they're making the kind of music that should be getting played on the radio. This is the sort of stuff that everyone should be listening to. But the stuff they are listening to is very different. It's toxic, it's harmful, it's pushing agendas, and it's all by design.
Yeah, even growing up, there was a limited amount of music that really had a deeper, more political or social, uh, just topics and messages. But a lot of them came from the UK, believe it or not. Like, some artists that I liked growing up was like Low Key. He would always talk about obviously, current events and historical stuff and in regards to political stuff. And then Architects is they're a little on the newer side, but Architects was a band that I enjoyed, even though I didn't always agree with their worldview. Enter Shikari is another one. I remember they were playing at the time. They had the Zeitgeist Movement Festival, and they played there. And I got to have the singer on the show some years ago. But even my worldview has changed, slightly throughout the years. That even though I would just look at these artists as artists that I disagree with on certain things, but they were doing some positive things. You realize like there's not a lot of artists that will go as deep as like you would go in regards to what's really going on. It's like they'll talk about the surface level stuff. They'll talk about, oh yeah, I'm anti-war. Well, that's like not a very controversial thing to say. Everybody can kind of get on board with that. And there seems to be a level that they won't go to. They won't go all the way down the rabbit hole. And do you find that that's true with a lot of artists that do have maybe more political, just topics that they discuss in their lyrics?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Low Key there, who was an artist that I used to enjoy. I used to admire his lyrical perspectives because he used to be very outspoken about, for example, Palestine, Gaza, what's happening there. And he made records with Akala where they would talk a lot about colonialism and they would criticize the sort of elite ruling class. So that's all great stuff. But then along came Convid in 2020, and that for me was the real acid test of where any artist loyalties lie. So another artist from an entirely different generation and a different genre to Low Key would be Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who similarly has been outspoken about many of the same causes that Low Key has. But in 2020, did we find either of those artists or any of their peers really shining a spotlight on what was going on? The scam, the monumental deception, the gaslighting, the outrageous incursions on our rights and freedoms, all based on provable lies. It really didn't take much research for anyone to get down to the true nature of what that agenda was all about. And people like Low Key and Roger Waters, if they can research what's happening in Palestine, are certainly able to do the research that was necessary there. And yet we got nothing from him. Low-key disappointed, just had nothing to say about it. Virtually nothing from Akala. Roger Waters praised Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates as great people, so he's straight off the list. And nothing from any of these others as well. Morrissey of the Smiths has been outspoken about many things. He was very vocally anti-royal, and he's had lots of things to say about some very controversial issues. But where was he during that debacle? He did do one interview that I'm aware of where he was vaguely critical of some of the government's lockdown measures, but it's not going far enough. If you're genuinely rebellious, if you're an artist who's built a reputation and an image for yourself of being maybe an anarchist or a bit of an anti-establishment kind of individual, then the past 4 years has been the perfect opportunity for you to stand up and let it be known where your loyalties lie. And yet, what have we heard? Virtual silence from nearly all of them. The only artists worthy of mention that people will know in the mainstream would be Van Morrison, who put out a couple of albums which were very anti lockdown measures, Ian Brown of the Stone Roses, who was vocal on social media and tweeted a lot, but didn't do any interviews that I'm aware of, which is a great shame. And then Eric Clapton, who did one interview talking about his bad experience with an arm spear situation. And that was it. No further interviews. And that's it. That is absolutely pathetic. I mean, plenty of artists that people won't know because they're not household names had things to say about it. But in terms of recognizable names, that's it. It's pathetic, it's pitiful, and it actually tells you everything you need to know about the controlled nature of the industry and how free so-called artists really are to express themselves openly.
Yeah, I lost respect for a lot of artists and people just in general during COVID because you're right. It was almost like it was a social test on how how far will you go to expose truth and expose corruption, and will your worldview, if it cross paths with your worldview, if it means that you have to make people who are on your political ideology team a enemy, would you do so? Would you go that far? And you would see that it's like it was really easy for people to demonize people who didn't agree with their ideologies, right? The people that were on the other political team. But once it got to a point where they realized, like, okay, now the bad guys are on my team. I now you're silent, and that was a huge issue. And somebody else that we should mention because he's been on the show and I'm a big fan of his and he was very outspoken was Zuby. Zuby's a past guest on the show and he was very outspoken. I give him a lot of credit for being as outspoken as he is. Anybody with a huge platform that was willing to be outspoken soon and quickly after it was all going down. I give a lot of credit to. I give very little credit to the people that are coming out now that waited till it was safe to come out. And now it's like, well, now that I'm not going to get, demonized by everybody and I'm not going to get strikes on every social media account I have and my family's not going to hate me, then I'll say, yeah, we shouldn't have done this or we shouldn't have done that. Another band from actually Ireland, Irish, I always call them the Irish Rage Against the Machine was 1 Minute Silence. They were another band. I had the singer on years ago, when they were still playing music. And I was always curious on like a band like them, like if they were still writing music now, what would they have to say? Because they're very outspoken and Barry Yap, the singer, he was very knowledgeable. But it's always concerning when you see people who seem to be so outspoken and so passionate about stuff and so willing to expose corruption, and then once the time comes to push back against, like I said, people who share maybe similar worldviews, they won't do it, and then it really shows that like it's not about truth, it's not about actually exposing everybody who's corrupt and everybody that is wrong, that you have these blinders on. And that's a huge issue in regards to your worldview. And when you go down these rabbit holes, do you have some type of like self-reflecting you do and just make sure that like, hey, I'm not subscribed, I don't plant my flag anywhere, I'm open to being wrong, I'm open to go anywhere this takes me? Do you consciously think about that?
Yeah, well, I've changed my perspective on a few things over the years. So I'm always open to revising, my standpoint on anything. And one example of that would be the Paul McCartney situation. So when I first started researching conspiracy culture within the music industry, one of the first things you always come across is this suggestion that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966. The date that we're given for it is 9/11 of 66, and he's been replaced by an imposter. The name usually given is William Shepherd or William Shepherd Campbell, known as Billy Shears, who's been playing the public role to this day. And very early on, I looked at the evidence for this. And I became convinced that the individual we have today, who refers to himself as Paul McCartney, is not the original biological James Paul McCartney. But I looked further into it, And I started looking at forensic evidence and comparing photographs and video footage from both before and after 1966. And it looked to me as if there's been two individuals, or at least two, possibly more than two, playing that role uh, both before and after 66. So it's not a clear-cut thing. We don't have provable evidence that the original McCartney died in 66. But what I can say with absolute confidence is that there's been more than one. So you're definitely looking at least two different people when you look at photographs and video footage of the Beatles and McCartney, from through the decades. So I've revised my perspective on that one, and I still think it's quite possible that the original Paul died, but it's not provable as far as I'm concerned. What is provable is that we've had more than one. And very early on in my research, I was coming across subjects, areas, which to many people would be fantastic or impossible or outrageous, particularly when you get into things like mind control, MK Ultra style trauma-based mind control, which many artists and celebrities of all kinds get put through. And this is very closely linked to satanic ritual abuse and many of these occult rituals which take place within entertainment. And I remember early on thinking, I hope I've got this right. This stuff just seems so far-fetched. And particularly when I first started writing my Musical Truth Volume 1 book, which was in 2014 and 2015, and I self-published that in early 2016. And I remember when I first put it out, that was me really sticking my head above the parapet and kind of burning a lot of bridges behind me. And I was thinking, God, I've got this right. I hope this stuff checks out. And I have to say, every piece of evidence that has ever come my way, and when you first put a book out and you start doing podcasts and live talks of this nature, information just kind of gravitates towards you, and other researchers just get drawn towards you magnet-like, and you discover a community of other researchers. And I have to say that everything I put into that first book, as far as I'm concerned, checks out. I had people emailing me saying, yes, what you've written there about the nature of contracts that artists enter into in order to have careers and selling their souls for fame and fortune is absolutely correct, because I was in a band, we were due to get signed to a major label, and that's exactly what was laid on the table for us. But we didn't want it. We walked out the door, they let us go, and obviously our careers went nowhere. And I've had producers, I've had record industry executives, and they've all written to me and they've said, what you put in that book and what you speak about in your talks absolutely checks out. It's absolutely real. This stuff really does go on. So it's been constant validation, actually, over the past 15 years or so. And it's just reassuring on one level to know that the information is accurate. But on another level, I wish I didn't have to be doing this. I wish I could come with a more positive message. It doesn't bring me any joy to tell people that the music industry is run by Satanists and dark occultists and, those that are into all kinds of other practices. I wish it was some other way, but it is what it is. I've found it to be this way, and it's become my duty and my responsibility to communicate this information to other people. It's up to them what they do with it, but I'm discharging my responsibility to creation when I put this stuff out there. I just seem to have settled into this role. I found myself in this niche area where I'm just that guy that talks about all this music industry stuff. And this is my life now. This is what I do. And I just have to be content with it.
One thing that people talk a lot about is how the social engineers use culture and music to do their social engineering. And you hear about the hip hop culture, the gangster rap, how that was a great tool to lock up Black Americans. Young Black Americans have single parent families, which obviously cause you to have more locked up young Black Americans, because if you're raised with one parent, the likelihood of you succeeding in life drastically decreases. And and then obviously you hear about, you brought up the Beatles. The Beatles was manufactured, right? It was a lot of people believe that that whole thing was completely charade. Charlie Manson, right, links to the CIA and all that stuff and that whole hippie movement. How much of past trends, musical trends, have been organic, and how much of it, with your research, have you seen has been manipulated by others?
I think you have to go genre by genre rather than making a sweeping sort of blanket statement. I don't think you can accurately say that any trend or movement or fad that's ever come along has been completely created by social engineers. I think there are cases where movements start to evolve on their own, but they're very quickly spotted, or the potential of them is spotted. I mean, I'm still deliberating over hip hop culture and how organic that was. Because having been a DJ who played that sort of stuff out, I'd always assumed that the story that we got about Kool Herc, who's like the founding father of hip hop, he's this DJ that came out of a Jamaican family, and he used to set up sound systems in his neighborhood in the Bronx, New York, beginning in 1973, and hold block parties in parks and in streets. And that's where breakdancing first emerged, and basically hip hop culture and turntablism evolved out of that. You had Grandmaster Flash, who came along, and he's credited with having invented the art of turntablism. And then there's Africa Bambaataa, but we don't really talk about him anymore, given the accusations that there are against him of sexual impropriety against young males. Um, so now I've got some questions about that, and I'm wondering whether things really did evolve out of those early block parties, and that gave birth to the first hip hop groups like the Sugar Hill Gang and the Furious Five, and then eventually it gravitated towards gangster rap, at which point that whole scene had obviously been co-opted by the corporations, because gangster rap was an entirely fabricated construct designed to achieve the things that you just outlined. So that's hip hop. Then you can look at the 60s hippie scene, the so-called counterculture, the flower power thing. And I think that may have had some sort of organic roots. There would have been young people in the 1960s that were opposed to the Vietnam War and that were allied to certain political causes and movements that were, popular in those times. But the social engineers would have spotters out there who keep an eye on these emerging trends. And the minute one shows the potential of sweeping up large numbers of people and being any kind of threat to the system, they will attempt to co-opt it. It's at that point that they put their infiltrators into the scene, and they start to steer it off in certain desired directions in line with social engineering agendas. There are some genres which are more obviously controlled. I've taken a close look at the punk and new wave scene beginning in the 1970s, and that whole thing just seems to be a complete setup, because most of the bands involved came out of the military. They've got direct links into the world of the military or military intelligence. We find many such links with the 60s bands, which was highlighted by the author and researcher Dave McGowan in his book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. So I think punk and new wave is an obviously a constructed one. Acid house and rave and electronic dance music coming out of the UK. The jury's kind of still out on that one for me, because I was involved in that in the late 80s. I was swept up in it. I loved the music and the culture of those times, went to many of the parties. And I don't know whether that evolved kind of on its own and then got steered off, or whether it was constructed right from the start. Certainly, it bears all the hallmarks of having been a reboot or a repackaging of what happened in the 1960s, simply with electronic dance music replacing the psychedelic rock, MDMA or ecstasy replacing the LSD as the drug of choice, and then the open air raves and the parties replacing the hippie gatherings and music festivals of the 60s. So, yeah, I think you have to look at it scene by scene. Some are more obviously controlled than others, but none are allowed to get to a stage where they're genuinely inspiring people and genuinely galvanizing people towards opposing the so-called elite ruling class in any way. The minute something becomes a genuine threat, they will either shut it down or put so many infiltrators into it that the threat gets negated.
Now on the other show I host with actually a mutual friend of ours, Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, and Sam Tripoli and Midnight Mike, we talked about this a couple episodes ago about how as somebody like myself who loved dark music growing up, I listened to Napalm Death. I listened to, the heaviest, darkest stuff. I listened to, when Slipknot came out, I was immediately attracted to it because their first album was so dark and had just this vibe to it. Bands like KMFDM, Gravity Kills, anything that was kind of dark and different and weird. I was into in the electronic scene, in the metal scene, and then bands that mix the two. I always loved those type of bands too. Industrial scene, Kami Christ, bands like that. And to me, it looking at it as an adult now, and as a parent also, I have two kids, a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old boy and 7-year-old girl, and I'm looking at the music that they're listening to or the music that's popular now. And I'm just like, I'm looking at it and I don't know if I'm looking at it because I'm looking at it differently because it's actually different, or I'm looking at it different because I'm looking at it from a different perspective. It's if you change the way you look at things, what you look at changes, right? It's like everything's perspective. And I'm like, okay, when I'm young and I'm growing up and I'm listening to this dark stuff, I was born in Portugal, and I moved to the States at a fairly young age. And my parents were too busy just trying to make ends meet and trying to, chase that American dream that they were sold to really pay any attention to what I was doing. So I kind of got to listen to whatever I wanted to. So I was listening to stuff that I'm like, I'm listening to Cannibal Corpse and like, death metal. And then I'm like, my parents have no idea what I'm listening to, and they just they just saw it as entertainment and music, and they didn't really care much about it. And now as an adult looking at my kids, I'm like looking at everything like, wow, they're like, is that messaging? Is that satanic messaging? Is that actual symbolism? And is it done for the purpose of, because artists will, you never want to restrict art, right? As you know, like if you put restrictions on art, then you get a very like, cookie cutter art, and, very tone down art. You want people who push the boundaries, who do new things, who maybe, do some things that might be considered like shock rock, like you can go to the Alex Coopers, you can go to, a lot of different, I mean, Cannibal Corpse, for example, Slayer. A lot of these bands weren't doing, weren't writing these lyrics and creating this dark art imagery for the albums because they honestly were satanic. I'm sure they were out there, but many of them were doing it because they just enjoyed that whole culture of everybody in metal bands wore black, had very cool designs on their art and t-shirts and merch. So I guess my long-winded question is, how much of it do you think has changed? In regards to like, was it before just art being pushed, against the grain and doing things that were different and dark because they were really just artists kind of experimenting with things and organically just wanting to do stuff like that? Or, has time changed and now it's like it's not nothing is being seems to be done and created for the purpose of art. Now it seems like it's about messaging and symbolism and propaganda and really trying to negatively influence the young.
Exactly. I've got a lot of friends who look at the movie world and they're into things like the Star Wars franchise and some of these other movies, Doctor Who as a TV series. And they say that many of these film production companies are now losing money on all these films that they keep churning out because they've just become vehicles for messaging, social engineering, pushing of agendas. So they're pushing wokeism and they're pushing transhumanism and stuff like this. So it's no longer about the story. It's no longer about the legacy of the franchise. It's just about pushing these messages. And they're losing money because people don't want to go and see these movies because they're straight garbage. But they're not worried about losing the money because money doesn't really mean anything to them. because it's in plentiful supply when you move in those kind of circles. It's become more important to push the message than to make money. And the music industry has become no different. So the same agendas are getting pushed there: transhumanism, transgenderism. I'm talking about it as an agenda, as an organized agenda. And the music now is straight garbage. It is. It's straight satanic garbage. That's not an opinion. That's not, subjective. It's a fact. I mean, look at some of the stuff that's being pushed. Little Nas X had a shoe, a Nike shoe that he was pushing the other year, and it was promoted as containing human blood. And he's getting away with that. Lady Gaga had a perfume a few years ago, which was said to have had traces of blood and semen in it. Nice, right? There was an artist, I use the term very loosely. I mentioned this one in my public talks. He goes by the name of New Age Jerk Boy. He purports to be a rapper. He appeared in the video to his song Married to the Game in a white wedding dress with rainbow coloured hair, giving fellatio to a machine gun. There's a so-called rapper called Young Thug who appeared in a promotional photo in a dress as Little Bo Peep, skipping. So these are the agendas that are getting pushed. And I know people will say it's a generational thing and you can't expect music to be the same at your age as it was 30 years ago. And I've got memories of when I was growing up, my dad shouting up at me when I was playing music in my bedroom saying, "Turn that garbage off." And I now find myself doing the same with my kids. But the difference is, it really is garbage now. The stuff I was listening to in the 80s wasn't garbage. It was to my dad because it was different stuff to what he grew up with. But the stuff being pushed now really is garbage. It's satanic. It's pushing agendas. It's produced digitally and electronically, meaning that all kinds of things can be stripped into the electronic frequencies that have an effect on people on an unseen level. And it does affect young listeners. What is encouraging is that you mentioned there that you grew up listening to some really dark music. And I was never into that rock type stuff, rock music and grunge never appealed to me. I was always more into hip hop and rap and black forms of music. But I used to listen to a lot of really dark hip hop records. I was listening to Mobb Deep, Notorious B.I.G., Wu-Tang Clan, and they're just talking about murdering people. They're talking about, doing drive-by shootings and, you know, running drugs and guns and just really negative stuff. But I think on reflection that I've turned out pretty okay. And I think you have as well. You strike me as a fairly decent, moral individual. You're doing that show, so you must have a conscience in there. So even though we grew up with that dark stuff and it would have been intended to have an effect on us, on anyone listening to it, we've managed to break that programming and become relatively moral individuals, it would seem. So it is possible to surpass it, but you have to be conscious of what the agendas are, and you have to be aware that, they're there in the first place to stand a chance of breaking the programming and breaking those mind control magic spells. So that's why I do this work, and many other researchers do a great job as well, particularly online with videos that they put out to try and get through to young people and let them know what this stuff is designed to do to them and the kind of mindsets that they're trying to put into their consciousness. And it's very important to get through to young people. One of the things that kind of irks me about the live talks that I do many conferences and meetup groups, is the fact that the demographic that turn up to these is generally in the 50 to 70 age group. And the 50 to 70-year-olds already get it. What I want to see when I look out in the crowd is a sea of 20 and 30 somethings, because they're the ones that are being targeted with the programming. And it's more difficult to know how to get through to that kind of generation, but they're definitely the ones that need to be reached, because they're the ones in the crosshairs of the social engineers.
Well, let's reach them by talking about P. Diddy and some of the artists that are in the news today. I mean, I think P. Diddy seems to be our Jimmy Savile, and
P. Dodie,
yeah, P. Diddy, yes, P. Diddy, or you know, P.
or just Diddley. I'll call him Diddley.
Yeah, it's the thing is what's being exposed is that things are much deeper and darker than people think. A lot of times people look at things and it's like at a surface level where it's like, oh yeah, one bad guy, like, hey, there's bad people in everywhere, in every industry and everywhere. And they're realizing like this isn't just one bad guy. This is the way the system works. This is literally how the whole system has always worked. I mean, this guy was under the wing of Clyde Davis, and this goes back to him and people even older than him. And when you look at the record labels, I remember there was a good documentary called Artifact. I think it was. It was a 30 Seconds of Mars documentary about how at the height of their career, they were selling out everything and still broke because the record labels controlled everything and they would inflate. So basically, they would give you money to go on tour and inflate the prices on everything, so and then you just couldn't possibly ever catch up, right? The money you were making was just going to directly to the record label. I mean, the record labels basically work as a Ponzi scheme or similar type of scheme as like a bank would work. It's like they're taking money from one person and giving it to another and making interest on everything and really not producing anything, and yet they're the ones who are profiting. And that's kind of the world we live in. And when you look at like those record labels, like who are the heads of those record labels? Some of those people are being exposed. There's links now. There is a journalist that I follow on Twitter that's talking about some weird links between Taylor Swift and the music companies that she works with and who they are. And it just seems like, it's funny because Alex Jones says it, and it's always seems to be true. Like the world's run by pedophiles, and it seems like it when you look at like music, Hollywood, politics. Like there seems to be no industry whatsoever that if you go down deep enough down that rabbit hole and you start researching the people at the highest levels in those industries, fashion, they all seem to be sick pedophiles. And what's your thoughts? Have you been paying attention to the P. Diddy story and other related topics to that? And if you have, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I have. I've not been looking at every fine detail, but I've known about Diddy for decades actually, because I got involved in rap and hip hop in the 90s, and that's when Diddy was starting to come through. He was known as Puff Daddy back then, Puffy. Sean Combs is his real name. So he was hired initially to head up a division of Arista Records called Uptown under the leadership of a guy called Andre Harrell, who's since deceased. And as you say, Clive Davis was the head honcho at Arista at the time. There's loads to say about Clive Davis, especially when you get into the strange death of Whitney Houston and that whole ritual, which is what it was, and the role that Clive Davis played there. Very dark character. He's been around forever. He's been in the music industry since the 1960s, pushing different agendas. So he gave Puffy his first break, and then Puffy was able to set up his own imprint, Bad Boy Records, and that's where he started hiring a bunch of artists like Notorious B.I.G., Biggie Smalls, and a whole bunch of other rappers. And the point has been made many times that anyone that was ever signed to Puffy's Bad Boy Records label has suffered misfortune. The most extreme example is the Notorious B.I.G., who was murdered in a drive-by shooting in March of 97. A lot of researchers, a lot of people that have looked into it feel that Puffy would have been complicit or at least would have had foreknowledge of what was going to happen to Biggie. How lucky that he wasn't riding in the same car. Phew. And then you've got other artists like Craig Mack, uh, now deceased. Uh, who else is there? G Dep, Shine, Loon. There are many other groups. All the rappers that were on Puffy's label have suffered misfortune. They were either ripped off financially. Shine went to jail He took the rap for an event where Puffy was in a nightclub waving a gun around, and then they got chased by police, and the gun got thrown out of the window. And according to people involved in the story, Puffy paid off Shine to do the jail time for him. And when Shine emerged from jail, he became a rabbi, if I'm not mistaken, in the Jewish faith. And then Mace, who was another bad boy rapper, became a Christian minister. So something extreme has happened when these former rappers end up turning to religion to try and deal with what's happened to them at Bad Boy. And then you got the female artists, and the most extreme example there is Cassie, who was a singer and reportedly Puffy's partner, although it would appear that Puffy's preferences actually lie elsewhere, beyond women. But nevertheless, she's said to have been his partner, and she's the main one that kind of triggered all these accusations against him, which are coming out now. And there are multiple ones. It's not just one or two cases. It's very hard to see how he's going to walk away from this one. It looks as if he's going to be R. Kelly'd. R. Kelly was involved in similar accusations, basically accused of running a sort of mind control sex harem by multiple women, and he went to jail for that. So if Puffy walks away from this one, it will be a miracle and an act of God, or proof that he's got friends in some very high places and is high level connected, or has the blackmail goods on some very powerful people who would prefer certain evidence not to come out. So it's very important that people realize that the P. Diddy story is not an isolated incident, in the same way Jimmy Savile was not the only BBC paedophile. The damage limitation that gets put into place tries to convince people that this is one bad apple. It's just one individual that got away with it under everyone's noses somehow. Nobody knew what he was up to, but we know now. But in the case of Savile, he's dead, so there's nothing we can do. And with Diddy, it's like, oh yeah, he was into some stuff, but it's just the type of individual he is. No, that's the true nature of the industry. And as you say, it's not just the music industry. You'll find the exact same dynamic and the exact same stuff going on in the Hollywood film industry, in the world of banking, finance, law, the military, science, academia, big business, mainstream media, absolutely everywhere, because the same groups, the same networks run every strata of organized society. It becomes more obvious with entertainment and popular culture because that's more on public display. And names like P. Diddy and many of these others, many of these, Harvey Weinstein and people like this, are names that people recognize, whereas they might not recognize names from banking, finance, law, and such. But it goes on absolutely everywhere. And what we're dealing with now is a very highly visible example of just how sick, corrupt, and diseased these industries are. So it's quite encouraging to see that this stuff is coming out now, but it's got to be taken all the way. And people have got to realize that these are not isolated incidents.
The problem with taking it all the way is look at what happened with Epstein. Obviously he didn't kill himself. He was murdered to shut him up. Ghislaine Maxwell is charged with something, but there's it's like, why is anybody, if there was sex trafficking, like the Vince McMahon story, it's similar, like it's being finally openly talked about and accepted. But these guys there's been chats and discussions and chatter in the shadows about these guys for years and years and years and years. And only after it's publicly accepted that, hey, they're a bad person, and then all of a sudden people openly discuss it. But it's like, where are all the real journalists to really dive deep into these people prior to, again, like similar to COVID, where it's like, oh, now that it's safe to say these things, you do it. But when it was hard to say it, when you probably could have protected some people by exposing these people earlier, you didn't do that, right? And it seems like it's a reoccurring theme over and over again, that it's like once the mainstream media talks about it, you realize like, oh my God, this has been going on forever. And nobody cared. Like there was whispers. Some people would come out and try to tell their story, but nobody wanted to really openly put a spotlight on it. And and the P. Diddy thing is crazy because, like you said, this is a guy who, especially people our age or older, who grew up with him just being everywhere. I mean, he was just, every big artist he was linked to. He had amazing control over the hip hop scene. He he had all these mysterious deaths that surrounded him with other artists, and even the head of security for Michael Jackson is linked to P. Diddy. Some young guy who's like, how did this guy get like a really sketchy
The
history?
mother of one of his children died mysteriously as well.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like it's the Clinton body count all over again. It's like, all these weird deaths. A lot of people believe that he was linked not just to the Notorious B.I.G. murder, but also the Tupac murder. There's a decent documentary called Surviving Diddy that is on YouTube still that you can find, and it's fairly good. And the crazy thing is like there's no narration. This is just clips of people like bodyguards and clips of people of like 50 Cent and Usher and all these people, and you just see all these little hints of like, oh, the just for a little bit, the truth was exposed a little bit. P. Diddy or Usher talking about being, whatever he was, like 16 or 13, whatever age he was, going to P. Diddy's parties and living with him. It's like, what adult is letting a 13-year-old or any teenager go live with another adult who's partying it up and having all these drugs and other adults around and live there. I mean, same thing happened with Justin Bieber. Like he was, was with him, and there was a weird thing with him because all of a sudden he got, it's like I don't get it. You have this mentor, P. Diddy, who's supposed, and Usher, who are supposed to be your mentors. How did you get off track so far, right? How did you end up getting all the tattoos and doing all this partying if you're supposed to have these adult mentors? Like you figure the opposite should happen, right? Like if you don't have any adult mentors who've been in the industry for a while, then you could easily, just go off the rails. But if you have these adult mentors around you who supposedly actually care about you and know the industry and well, are supposed to be looking after you, how does this all happen? So 50 Cent's coming out with a documentary on P. Diddy that he's been. I give actually 50 Cent some credit because he seems not to pull punches and he doesn't seem to care who he pisses off. I think Cat Williams, same thing. Like somebody else who I think has done a really good job of kind of like just sharing the inner workings of Hollywood and the music industry because he's been so deep into the hip hop scene and the Hollywood scene and being on in the barbershop movies and all these huge blockbuster movies that he was a part of and knowing these people intimately and being willing to expose this stuff. But you do seem a common thread, right? Something you brought up that I would like your thoughts on. It does seem like spirituality and some type of spirituality seems to give these people either the I don't know if the willingness to come out, and it does seem like there's something about like, not participating in these things if you're a spiritual person. Do you see some of that it's like maybe that's another sign that it is some type of satanic, dark arts type thing going on because the spiritual ones are the ones being outspoken?
With some of the names that I mentioned earlier, it seems they've turned towards spirituality as a way of dealing with what they saw in the industry. As you mentioned earlier, there are many bands that were pushing Satanism and satanic ideas, and you get the impression they were doing it for the shock value or for the so-called artistic value. This was pretty much the rage in the 70s. Many of the, heavy metal, heavy rock bands that came out of that era were pushing that kind of imagery. But it's got far darker and it's not being done for the sake of art anymore. We're getting a glimpse into how these industries operate and just how sick and evil the people that sit at the very top of them are. I wonder why all this stuff is coming out now about Diddy, all these revelations, because it seems to me that if the industry had wanted to, they could have kept a lid on this. I also wondered the same thing about the Savile revelations. I don't know if it comes down to this need that the so-called elites have to tell us what they're doing, to place the truth in plain sight. It goes into karma and consequentialism. It's part of their spiritual belief system. But those of a more spiritual persuasion might argue that the reason all these revelations about Diddy and all these Hollywood producers and actors and stuff that have been accused of these things is coming out is down to some sort of truth vibration. It's something about the times in which we're living. We're going into an era where truth is getting exposed and the darkness is getting stripped away. I don't know if that's the case. I used to subscribe to that more than I do now. Or are they throwing Diddy under the bus? Has he outlived his usefulness? Do they do this from time to time? Is that what happened with R. Kelly? You know, they'll use them for a few decades, and then when they decide they don't need them anymore, they just dispose of them because they mean nothing to them. I mean, P. Diddy, as far as I know, doesn't come out of any elite bloodline family, so he's not high up in the pecking order of things. He's a stooge, a bagman, an errand boy. That's all he's ever been. He's been very useful to the industry, but they don't seem to need him anymore. So I've got to hope that it's the former and that there's something about this era, these times, which is causing all this darkness to get exposed and all this horrific stuff to come to the surface. And it seems there's going to have to be a lot more of it because you mentioned the Jeffrey Epstein situation. And it's been revealed that the likes of Sir Richard Branson and Bill Gates and even Stephen Hawking, which is unimaginable, even though there were more than one Stephen Hawking as well. And then people like Mick Jagger, they all appear in Epstein's little black book, and they're apparently on the Lolita Express. Donald Trump is a name that comes up as well. And, you know, how many more of these names does it take for the general public to say, what's going on? Why are all these high level people involved with a known sex trafficker, a known paedophile? What's Bill Gates doing on there? There are still people who believe that Bill Gates is a philanthropist. They actually believe that he gives all his money away to vaccination programs and stuff because he cares about people and he wants to help them. And yet his name appears on that flight log. You know, what level of short-sightedness are people operating under, and how much more do they have to see before they face up to the uncomfortable truth of how this society is structured? I get it that people don't, you know, find it difficult to face up to these things because you come to realize that your entire life has been a lie and the world is nothing like you thought it was. But it is what it is. Many of us have gone through our dark night of the soul. We've had to deal with it. We've had to take personal responsibility and we've had to find ways of moving through it. Now it's everybody else's turn because until society as a whole gets to that point, faces up to what's going on, deals with it, and most importantly, takes steps to put a stop to all this evil and darkness and madness and insanity that's going on, then we're only going to get more of it. Where is the line in the sand? What point do we have to reach where all this stuff breaks the surface and people in their mass numbers rise up and say, enough, no more, we're putting this down. This system is finished. It has to go. I don't know how close we are to that or if it's ever going to happen. Maybe it will happen in 6 months. Maybe it will happen in 30 years. Maybe it will happen in 100 years, or maybe it won't happen at all. I wish I had the answer for you.
Well, whenever it happens, I think we're definitely helping it happen with our little contributions to exposing this stuff. And
Well, we are, yeah.
yeah, and I can't thank you enough for all the work that you've done, all the years of exposing this stuff and talking about this stuff, and for people listening, because you are coming to the States, and I'm a East Coaster. I live in Massachusetts, born in Portugal but raised in Massachusetts. You'll be nearby. You'll be I think you have 4 locations, right, for your speaking
Sure.
tour, and let people know where you're going to be, let people know some of the things that you'll be discussing and they can look forward to. And I'll, of course, I'll put links to all this stuff in the show description so people can purchase tickets. And yeah, give people a little bit of information about your speaking tour.
Sure. Well, like Eddie Murphy, I'm coming to America. I did a tour in November, just gone, of Australia, which went really well. I did 4 talks in 4 different cities there, and there was a lot of appetite for the information. It went down very well. There were a lot of people that were hungry to find out more about how the industry operates. And I had a section in there about Australian artists so that it was relevant to those crowds. And that tour went so well that I thought, well, why don't I try it in America? Now, I can't go all over America because it's a big place. So I've had to restrict myself just to the sort of northeast corner of the East Coast, I guess, the Eastern Seaboard. So I'm hitting 4 cities and it begins next week. So the first one is Wednesday, 3rd of April. I'm coming to Boston, so hopefully I'll see you there. That's going to be at the Union Tavern in the Somerville district of Boston. And that's on the Wednesday evening from 7 to 10 p.m. So each of these events is 3 hours long. It involves me speaking in two parts, probably for about an hour and a quarter each time, little break in the middle, and then some Q&A with the audience at the end. So the next gig is Saturday, the 6th of April. I'm going to be in Philadelphia at a venue called Misconduct Tavern. That's 6 to 9 p.m. on the Saturday. Following day, New York City, Manhattan at the Town School. This is an afternoon one. We could only get that venue on a Sunday afternoon, so that's 2 to 5 p.m. And then the final one is Wednesday, the 10th of April in Connecticut. I'm going to be in New Haven, belly of the beast, home of Yale, Skull and Bones, at a venue called Bar New Haven. And that's 7 to 10 p.m. as well. So the title of the talk is Music's Military and Mind Control Connections. I'll be unpacking all the information I've got to demonstrate beyond doubt with evidence that the music industry is to a very large extent a military grade mass mind control operation. This is stuff I've been talking about for years, and I've collated together a lot of the more compelling information which I want to unveil to American crowds. So those are the 4 gigs: Boston, Philadelphia, New York, New Haven. Tickets are on sale through Ticket Tailor. So I had some issues with Eventbrite. Initially, I was going with Eventbrite, and people were having lots of issues paying for the tickets. So I don't quite know what was going on there. I had to switch vendors to Ticket Tailor. So that's where you can get a ticket to one of these events. I've got a crowdfunder which runs out tomorrow. I've just been trying to raise funds to cover some of the costs of getting out there, but there's still a chance for the next couple of days, if the show goes out in time, for people to donate to that. But otherwise, if you want to come along and catch the information and help me out and help my work to continue, then please grab yourself a ticket to one of these events. And it really helps with planning and preparation if people can buy a ticket in advance. I know many prefer to just rock up and pay on the day, which you can do, but it does help for planning purposes if people can get their ticket in advance, if they know they definitely can come.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, you're going to be in my neck of the woods, about an hour and a half from New Haven and Boston. So like kind of right in the middle. Bar New Haven, if it's the same place that it's actually a club and a pizzeria. It's
Exactly. It's a pizza joint, in a good way. I know, pizza has some connotations, but no, it's a bona fide pizzeria and a bar. So yeah, it sounds like the same one.
Yeah, that place was it was, I remember the first time I went there, you walked through like a pizzeria, and then in the back there's like a EDM club. It was actually pretty cool. Like on weekends it was, I mean, packed. It was like kind of one of the more popular places in New Haven. And the nice thing is, if you like pizza, you're in the right place, because you're actually hitting a lot of the good spots for pizza. New Haven is, world known for their pizza. Obviously, New York and Boston has some. Massachusetts also has some amazing pizza also. So hopefully you'll be able to dibble dabble in some of that while you're here.
Pizza and beer, it's all good.
Yeah, yeah, that's the diet when you're on tour. Yeah, I hear you. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for your time. I really appreciate it. If there's any links specifically that you want me to put in the show description, please send them to me. I'll make sure to put them out. I'm going to do my best to get this show out within the next 24 hours so people can listen to it and download it and get a heads up notice on the events and plan ahead if they can make any of the shows. And thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for being so flexible. I've actually just did a little bit of traveling myself too, so I know how crazy that can all be, and planning and all that stuff. So and then hopefully we can meet up sometime when you're in the States. But I'll get this show out. Please, people, support Mark, support his work. Check out his books. He has quite a few books. I'll have links to his website and his Twitter account and anything else that he might have. I'll put in the show description his YouTube channel. And so definitely check out all that stuff. Support his work, and I'll send you the links to the show once it's up and live.
Great. Thanks for getting me on, brother. Really appreciate that. Time zones are a bitch when you're trying to program shows, especially at the time of year where you bugger around with clocks. And we try and throw people off from their natural connectedness to the cycles of time, So at the moment, we're 4 hours difference, but our clocks go forward tomorrow. So it's going to be 5 hours again then. And, sometimes coordinating these shows is a real bitch, but I'm glad we made this one happen. And thanks again for getting me on, and hope to see you at either Boston or New Haven, whichever.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Hey, safe travels if I don't talk to you before then, and hopefully, good luck with all the events and all the speaking events, and people come out and support. Thanks, Mark. Take care. We'll keep in
Cheers,
touch.
mate. All the best.
Cheers.